It begins with a sound, not loud, not immediate. A murmur, woven through the thick air like a secret. It rises from the cracked stones and sunken alleys, crawling up the flaking walls of ancient temples, clinging to the rotting wood of abandoned altars. A whisper, echoing through a city that should have crumbled to dust long ago but lingers, stubborn and enduring. Ekron, city of rot, domain of damnation, where even silence seems corrupted. You don't enter Ekron. You are absorbed into it. The stench of decay wraps itself around you like a sodden shroud. The streets, wide and once grand, now sag under the weight of centuries of filth, every inch of ground saturated with the city's festering essence. Monuments of faith, stolen from far-off lands, stand buried in muck, their pristine edges blurred by centuries of corrupt adoration. The air itself tastes wrong, thick with the bitter residue of old prayers that were twisted into curses. Ekron doesn't wait for you to understand it. It pulls you in before your mind has time to process. Buildings loom, some tall skeletal remains of what might once have been beautiful, others squat and wide, their grotesque facades bulging as if about to burst. No sense of order. No street plan that a sane mind could follow. It is a maze, designed not to be navigated, but to be lost in. People, if you could still call them that, shuffle in the shadows. Their eyes are empty, hollowed out by whatever twisted devotion has seized their minds. Grail Thralls, bound not just in body but in soul. Their flesh marked by rot and insect bites, their voices low and droning, as if forever caught in the act of praying to something far below understanding. They carry relics through the streets, bits of stained glass, tarnished icons, offering them to no one, as if compelled by an unseen hand. Above, the sky hangs heavy, a swollen bruise of grey and black, and the sun, when it dares to pierce through, casts light that seems sick, weak, barely able to illuminate more than the surface grime. Ekron lives in shadow, fed by darkness, sustained by despair. It doesn't want to be seen, it wants to be felt. Sometimes you catch the flutter of wings, too loud, too rhythmic. Swarms of insects buzz overhead, their collective hum merging with the city's own groaning breath. A single black fly lands on your hand, and it feels like more than an insect, like a watcher, like something ancient and patient. It doesn't move when you shake it off, only crawls across your skin, leaving a dark smear. You realize it isn't dirt, it's blood. Nothing here stays dead. Corpses lay where they fall, but they do not rot as they should. Instead, they are reclaimed by the city itself, absorbed into the ground, sprouting foul growths that throb with a slow, nauseating rhythm. No one clears the streets, no one cleans the blood, because in Ekron, death is not an end, it is fuel. The whispers grow louder when you stand still too long. They seem to know you, speaking not just to your ears but to your bones, like a voice calling from deep underground. It tells you of suffering, of gluttony turned inward, of the endless cycle that Ekron represents. You can almost make out words, names, places, warnings, but they slip away before they form fully. You don't want to know what they're saying. You don't want to listen, but you can't stop hearing it. And then, just as your mind teeters on the edge of yielding, something moves, a shadow that doesn't belong, a shape that slides from one broken monument to the next. You catch the barest glimpse of wings stretched too wide, too dark, and a face twisted into something both regal and monstrous. It's gone before you can be sure it was there. A trick of the mind, maybe. Or just Ekron, reminding you that it knows you're here. The city never lets you go. You don't leave Ekron unchanged. It stays with you, pressing down, embedding itself in your thoughts. When you finally tear yourself away, staggering out into the cleaner air beyond its borders, you still hear the whispers, still feel the weight of eyes that should not see. You didn't just visit Ekron, you survived it. Before the city, before the rot, before the grotesque amalgamations of faith and flesh, there was an angel. Exalted, luminous, a being whose radiance burned through the fabric of the heavens. His name was Beelzebub, the lord of the high place, the favoured among the divine. Where he moved, the air hummed with power. Where he spoke, creation itself seemed to respond, vibrating with purpose. He was not content, not with praise, not with glory, not even with the presence of the Divine Father, whose light spilled endlessly into the realm of angels. A hunger gnawed at Beelzebub, ancient and unnamed, a void that no amount of worship could fill. It wasn't rebellion at first, it was ambition, an ambition to transcend not just creation, but the Creator. He didn't just want to be admired, he wanted to be the source of admiration, the wellspring of all adoration. When the fall came, it wasn't a sudden plummet, but a slow, agonizing descent. His wings, once vast and white, blackened from within. Feathers charred, skin cracked, and what had once been beautiful became a ragged ruin. He fell not because he was thrown out, but because the weight of his own desire dragged him down like chains. When he landed, it was not on earth, but in a twisted realm where light never shone, a place that would become the seventh circle of hell. But the world had not seen the last of Beelzebub. He did not shrivel into obscurity. He transformed. The ambition that had ruined him became his essence. He consumed his own beauty, devoured his own soul, until nothing remained but the hunger itself. Beelzebub, Lord of Flies, Prince of Hell. Ekron did not rise immediately. The city would come later, when his hatred had fermented, when his disdain for creation had swelled into something monstrous. He wandered the circles, gathering those who shared his loathing, fallen spirits, corrupted souls, things that slithered and cawed in the darkness. He whispered to them, and his whispers became doctrine. Faith, twisted and inverted, became his tool. He had known defeat before. His mortal followers had failed him once, allowing their devotion to crumble under the weight of divine retribution. They had let the ark slip through their fingers, sent it crawling back to its chosen people like a wounded dog. Beelzebub would never forgive them. Humanity, with all its fickleness, would never be trusted again. That is when the idea took root. To forge something new, not a weapon, but a plague. A blight that would not just kill but corrupt, that would fester long after the bodies fell, that would cling to the bones of history and spread through the cracks of time itself. The Black Grail. A vile chalice birthed from his own essence, filled with a darkness too deep to fathom. When the plague was unleashed, it wasn't merely death that followed, it was transformation. Towns did not just fall, they became charnel pits, swarming with insects, buzzing with the incessant hum of ruin. Faith did not just crumble, it inverted, turning devout prayers into sinister invocations. Ekron rose from the rubble not as a city, but as an embodiment of his will. Every stone, every relic, every fragment of ancient worship dragged there by thralls of the Grail became part of the living, breathing monument to Beelzebub's triumph. And when the Hellgate of Jerusalem was breached, it became the city's heart, a pulsing, wretched core, pumping corruption through every alley and avenue. To his followers, he was not just a king. He was the proof that ambition could overcome divinity, that hunger could reshape reality. The clergy of the Fly preached not salvation, but consumption. To give was to feed their Lord. To bow was to make oneself prey. Ekron's anthem was not a hymn, but the buzz of a billion insects, each one a fragment of his ever-expanding will. Yet, even in his triumph, there is a gnawing emptiness. Though he gathers power, though he consumes what once worshipped others, there remains that original void, the one no amount of rot can fill. Beelzebub knows it, though he never shows it. The hunger will never end, and he will never rise to the gates of heaven to take his place. But he will never cease trying. He is Beelzebub, he is the Lord of the Flies, and Ekron is his wound, an eternal scar on creation, a monument not to his power, but to his desperation. The legend of the Black Grail does not start with violence, it begins with betrayal. A betrayal not just of faith, but of nature itself. Beelzebub, in his quest to corrupt creation, needed more than just an army. Armies die. Armies falter. He needed a force that could persist, that would infest the world long after his followers had crumbled to dust. He started with a concept, a chalice not to heal but to mar, a vessel that would hold not blood or wine, but pure, undiluted corruption. To craft such a thing was no small feat. It required more than infernal craft. It needed sacrifice. Beelzebub drained his own essence, poured fragments of his ambition and spite into its making. The chalice itself was formed from the bones of fallen angels, twisted and reshaped by demonic fire. When it was complete, it did not shine. It bled shadow, pulsed with a heartbeat that seemed too slow to be living, but too relentless to be dead. The Black Grail was not unleashed in a fit of rage, nor with a proclamation of power. It was poured out like poison into the world, slow, deliberate, infectious. Wherever its influence spread, life did not just end, it changed. Grass did not merely die, it blackened, sprouted tendrils that moved without wind. Rivers did not simply dry up, they thickened, grew stagnant, and oozed like open wounds. And then came the insects. At first they seemed incidental, flies gathering around the rot, locusts nesting in decayed temples. But they were more than just pests. Each insect was marked, bearing a fraction of Beelzebub's essence. They were not a plague on their own. They were the carriers of the Grail's will. When they swarmed, they did not just infest, they transformed. Human flesh broke down at their touch, not decomposing, but reforming into something else entirely. Victims did not just die, they became new nests for the corruption to breed. The swarms did not just roam freely, they seemed guided, drawn toward places of faith as if seeking to drown hope itself. Entire villages vanished overnight, swallowed in clouds of biting, stinging ruin. Priests who tried to cleanse the land found themselves buried in flies, their prayers choked out as the swarm poured into their lungs. Survivors claimed the insects whispered, not in words but in rhythms, patterns that made no sense but lingered in the mind long after the swarm moved on. The most devoted of Beelzebub's followers learned to cultivate these swarms, harnessing them as weapons, guiding them as if with invisible strings. They became the insect priests, adorned not with holy symbols, but with the chitinous shells of their swarming brethren. Rituals were performed in the midst of living storms, where the air thickened with crawling, buzzing life. These insects became more than a nuisance or a plague. They became part of Ekron itself. In some alleys, the ground is so thick with crawling things that the stones seem to shift as if alive. Entire buildings are cocooned in webbing spun by infernal spiders, their foundations held together by strands of corrupted silk. There are places in Ekron where the flies outnumber the living 1,000 to 1, where they buzz in patterns that resemble hymns twisted beyond recognition. When the Hellgate of Jerusalem opened, the swarm did not surge forth as one might expect. It spilled out slowly, methodically, infecting the land like a disease too stubborn to be eradicated. Where it passed, new thralls arose, not born of faith, but of infestation. In their eyes, there is nothing left of humanity, only the mindless devotion to the Lord of Flies. Yet, even among Beelzebub's servants, there is fear. They know that the swarm is not entirely controlled. It pulses with the Grail's intent, and even the most devout priests know that one misstep could see them consumed. The swarm does not care for loyalty. It obeys only the hunger that created it. In Ekron, loyalty is a fleeting thing. Fear, however, is eternal. The Black Grail itself is kept at the heart of Ekron, deep within the twisted cathedral that once housed true worship. Now, it is a shrine to corruption, and the Grail sits at the altar, seething, bleeding darkness that drips down the stone steps. Those who enter do so only at the behest of Beelzebub himself, for to touch the Grail is to invite dissolution. It does not grant power, it devours. Those who make it out alive, if such a term applies, do not speak of what they saw. Their minds are too broken, their words too fragmented. They walk as if guided by a force that moves their limbs for them. The insects trail them as if marking their passage, like mourners at a funeral that never ends. Ekron is not just a city, It is a feeding ground. The Black Grail ensures that. And as long as the swarm endures, so too does the will of the Lord of Flies. The city breathes with it, pulses with it, and without it, Ekron would collapse into dust and silence. But with it, the city lives, if one can call it living. It pulses, crawls, and feeds. There is a place where the air itself seems to tear, where the boundary between worlds is not just thin, but violated, a wound in the fabric of reality that never heals. The Hellgate of Jerusalem is not just a portal, it is a scar, festering with the corruption of ages. To stand near it is to feel the weight of 1,000 screams pressed into the earth. When it first opened, it did not announce itself with fire or light. There was no storm, no eruption, just silence, like the world holding its breath. Then the ground cracked, and from the depths emerged a breath, slow and nauseating, like the exhale of something ancient and angry. The air around it curdled, thickened, became suffocating. Those who witnessed it said the sun seemed to shy away, as if fearful of what had been revealed. Beelzebub did not open the gate himself. He only whispered the words forgotten by angels and feared by demons. The city of Jerusalem that was did not shatter in an instant. It crumbled over years, slowly rotting from within as the gate grew more potent. Priests prayed, armies marched, but nothing could close it. Nothing could purify the corruption that seeped into every stone. Over time, the gate did not just exist, it expanded. Its influence spread, bleeding into the streets, warping reality. People who wandered too close did not die. They changed. Flesh softened, minds unraveled. Some swore they saw faces in the air, staring back at them, whispering in a language they could not understand. They came back from the edge babbling, clawing at their own skin, convinced that the world was unraveling. Ekron did not spring up around the gate. It was pulled into being by it. The gate was not just a passage, but a force, calling to the lost, the broken, the desperate. Beelzebub's will shaped the ruins, twisted temples and palaces into grotesque mockeries of faith. The Hellgate became the heart of this new city, its pulse setting the rhythm of decay that spread like an infection. The clergy of the Fly built their cathedral around it, not to worship, but to contain. Not to sanctify, but to corrupt in ritual. To them, the gate is not a tool or a symbol. It is the presence of their Lord, a fragment of hell itself made manifest on earth. Their prayers are not to close it, but to widen it, to let the putrescence of hell flow freely, soaking the world in filth and despair. Every few decades, the gate pulses, a violent seismic shudder that sends cracks rippling through Ekron. Sometimes a shadow emerges, something not fully formed, barely perceptible. Beelzebub's servants do not speak of these apparitions, for fear that acknowledging them would give them power. They call them the echoes, fragments of hell that slip through when the gate wavers. To see one is to feel your sanity peel away, layer by fragile layer. Around the gate, reality bends. Shadows stretch unnaturally, and light flickers without a source. The air smells burnt, as if singed by something unseen. Visitors who come too close lose time. Hours pass like minutes, or sometimes minutes stretch into days. Memory becomes unreliable, and many wander in circles, convinced they are on a straight path. There are stories, whispers of a man who dared to look directly into the gate. He claimed to see not just hell, but the very foundation of despair itself, a place where souls were not tormented but unmade, where identity was shredded and purpose ceased. When he tried to speak of it, his tongue blackened and fell from his mouth. His screams lasted 3 days before his body simply disintegrated, leaving nothing but a shadow burned into the floor. To the missionaries of the Black Grail, the gate is a holy site, a place where the divine and the profane converge. They gather at the edge, offering chants in broken Enochian, believing that each recitation strengthens their Lord's power. Beelzebub himself rarely approaches it. It is a reminder not just of his triumph, but of his failure. He sought dominion, and instead, he created a fissure, an uncontrolled, unpredictable wound that festers despite his will. The Hellgate does not close. It cannot be destroyed. It remains, pulsing with a life of its own, independent of its creator's desires. It is a monument to ambition unchecked, to power unrestrained. It hums with a low, ceaseless tone, a resonance that seems to seep into your bones. When it pulses, the city shudders, as if holding its breath. No one knows if the gate will one day consume Ekron entirely, dragging the city into hell itself. But one truth remains. As long as Ekron exists, the Hellgate will remain its heart, a throbbing, open wound where faith and corruption converge, inseparable and eternal. The people of Ekron do not fear it, because they no longer remember a life without it. To them, the gate is not just a curse, it is their origin, their destiny, their damnation. In Ekron, devotion is not a choice, it is a compulsion, driven not by faith, but by corruption. The Grail Thralls are not worshippers in the traditional sense. They are vessels, hollowed out by the Black Grail's influence, their minds consumed, their wills stripped bare. To see them is to witness the aftermath of a soul's collapse, where humanity is not just lost, but devoured. These thralls are created through exposure to the Black Grail, or by succumbing to the will of the Hellgate itself. Once marked, they become conduits for Beelzebub's ambition, walking manifestations of his insatiable hunger. Their eyes are vacant, their skin mottled with the marks of decay. Some are covered in crawling insects, which burrow into their flesh and emerge through the same wounds, as if testing the limits of the human form. The thralls do not speak in coherent sentences. Their mouths move in a constant murmur, repeating fragments of prayers twisted beyond recognition. The words blend together, like a swarm of buzzing flies trapped within their throats. Even those who once knew them as family cannot recognize them now. Thralls are not just corrupted, they are erased, rewritten into new forms that exist solely to serve. Missionaries of the Black Grail differ from the thralls, though they share the same corruption. They retain their minds, or at least enough of them to speak, to reason, to proselytize. Their purpose is singular, to spread the influence of Ekron. They wander the world beyond the city, seeking out the desperate, the broken, the lost, anyone susceptible to the call of despair. These missionaries do not force conversion. They whisper promises of power, of immortality, of freedom from suffering. To those who listen, the words are honeyed, irresistible. They present the Black Grail not as a curse, but as salvation, offering it like a sacred relic. Those who drink from it do not become holy, they become thralls. The transformation is slow, starting with visions that seem beautiful. Cities made of gold, gardens blooming despite the rot. But as the corruption takes hold, the visions darken, and the new thrall's mind breaks apart like rotting wood. In Ekron, the missionaries return to share their successes, dragging new converts through the city gates like offerings. They speak of distant lands, of how the Grail's influence seeps into the very air, how even the most pious cannot resist the call forever. They take pride in their work, not realizing they too are enslaved, bound by the same hunger that consumes their lord. The Grail Thralls are not fighters. They are servitors, builders, laborers, gatherers of relics. They wander the streets with broken statues, shattered icons, anything that once held holy significance. They know that to restore the relics would be blasphemy, so they reshape them, twisting them into grotesque parodies, mashing symbols of different faiths together into hideous amalgamations. These are placed in the city squares, reminders that faith itself has been conquered, forced to bow before Beelzebub's will. The missionaries, on the other hand, are strategists. They move between territories, spreading rumors of salvation, of a city where suffering ends. They are not subtle in their appearance, adorned in robes stained with insect ichor, carrying staffs tipped with shards of corrupted relics. Their voices are not loud but insistent, each word a nail driven into the minds of the desperate. Those who resist are not harmed. They are marked, watched, and often wake up with strange symbols drawn in black across their homes. If they persist in their resistance, they may find themselves lured to Ekron by dreams, visions of lost loved ones calling from the edge of the city, begging for salvation. Once they enter, they never leave. The missionaries often operate in pairs, a reminder that loneliness breeds doubt. One speaks of salvation, the other of despair. Their dynamic is a performance, rehearsed but never scripted, as if they too believe in their lies. They rarely enter places of worship, but when they do, they make offerings of desecrated relics, placing them on altars with a reverence that feels wrong, like a butcher blessing his blade. Ekron thrives on their work. For every dozen they corrupt, 1 or 2 make their way back to the city, dragging their new followers behind them. The thralls never speak of their past lives. They only chant, only obey. The missionaries do not stay for long. They know they must continue their pilgrimage, spreading the word until the entire world is drawn to Ekron's gates. Sometimes, a thrall will show a glimmer of humanity, a fleeting moment where recognition flickers in their eyes, where they stop mid-chant and look around as if waking from a long nightmare. These moments are brief, ending with violent convulsions as the Black Grail's influence reasserts itself. The missionaries view this as a sign of purification, a cleansing of the last remnants of doubt. It is said that Beelzebub himself watches the missionaries with a mixture of pride and disdain. They are his creations, but they remind him of what he once was: charismatic, driven, full of purpose. Sometimes he addresses them directly, whispering words that they echo without question. Other times, he simply watches, as if assessing whether their zeal matches his own. In Ekron, there is no redemption. There is only the endless cycle of consumption, of souls, of faith, of hope. The Grail Thralls shuffle through the streets, the missionaries march beyond the walls, and Beelzebub watches, feeding off the decay. It is not an army. It is an infection, spreading without end.